Thank you. Welcome. Thanks very much, council staff, for attending this special meeting of the Council of the Corporation of the Municipality of Central Elgin on Thursday, April the 13th at 7 p.m. here in the council chambers. I welcome those that are joining us online as well. I think we have attendance, disclosure of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof. I think Ms. Halpin or Councillor Halpin in advance, I'd like to say, as I've mentioned, when we come to a vote on the budget, I'll recuse myself from the vote pertaining to salaries of staff. Councillor Halpin.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Sloan. My interest is also in the wages of staff, and the Integrity Commissioner said that as long as we've divided the question of general government staff, that I'm good to go for the rest of the conversation.
Great. Thanks, Councillor Halpin. So reports, Director of Financial Services Treasurer, DFS 1023, budget deliberations. Discussion. Do we have Mr. Graves, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think for the flow this evening, the first motion up was just to receive the report that the finance director provided on April the 5th. Unfortunately, I don't believe she's joined us yet online, but I think we should proceed. And then it contained in that report that she provided, as you know, are a number of individual items that relate to various program areas in the municipality. So the plan would be to basically just start at the top and go through each one, and then we would council would do a vote, have a little discussion on each one to decide whether that's in or out of the budget. And we'll go down the list and see where we're at the end. And then if there's further discussion at the end of the list, then we can have it at that time. But that's how we would propose to do that, if that's okay with council.
Thank you. Council, does that suit our needs? So if I could get a mover and a seconder for the report. Accepting the report, Councillor Watson, Deputy Mayor Noble.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Councillor Watson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Noble, that report DFS 1023 regarding 2023 budget deliberations, additional information be received for information.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. As we move forward to budget deliberations, I will now ask Mr. Graves or the staff we have with us to begin the presentation of the 2023 municipal budget. Thank you, Mr. Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the first item relates to taxation and an increased projected supplemental taxation of $50,000 that would be adjusted in the budget. And so I don't know if council has any comments about that.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. Councillor Halpin.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Sloan, to Mr. Graves. I was wondering what the procedure is if this were to result in a deficit. Do we take that out as debt, or do we take that from a certain reserve fund?
Mr. Graves.
So throughout the year, the finance staff would be doing budget monitoring to see where we're at, and there may be plus and minuses in other parts of the budget. So before the end of the year, they would come back and report to you in terms of how that all shakes out and where it falls, and make recommendation at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. Councillor Halpin, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Sloan. Have you ever seen this happen before, Mr. Graves, that it resulted in a deficit, and at that time, what was recommended as far as payment?
Thank you, Councillor Halpin. Mr. Graves.
So in terms of the principles of a surplus or a deficit, of course, you're not allowed to budget for deficit, and that's not what we're doing in this instance. At the end of the year, of course, if you have a surplus, council, typically a surplus goes into reserve fund. If you have a deficit, then council would determine at that time whether it's going to be covered by a reserve fund, or you have to pick that up as a starting point for your 2024 budget, whatever that might be. So the impact of this particular item may or may not be a plus or a minus at the end of the year. The intent of the supplemental taxation is just growth in the community to see where you're at. So
Thank you, Mr. Graves. Any other questions or comments, please? Mr. Graves?
So if I may, so there would be an individual motion relating to this item.
Thank you. So I would need a mover and a seconder. Counselor Bachman. Counselor Connors.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Counselor Bachman, seconded by Counselor Connors, that staff be directed to increase the projected supplemental taxation revenue in the amount of $50,000.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried, or sorry, the motion fails. Mr. Graves?
Sure. So the next one relates to the county roads. The intent would be that staff be directed to take a higher amount from the county road reserve transfer for the 2023 budget in the amount of $100,000 to cover off county road expense.
Questions and comments? Counselor Graham, please.
So this seems like it's something that's a valid, if we've had such a mild winter and there's actual reserve funds that can be utilized. I think this is definitely something that I would support.
Thank you, Counselor Graham. Any other questions or comments? I don't think I got a mover and a seconder for this, did I? Sorry. If I could get a mover and a seconder, Counselor Halpin. Oh, Counselor Connors. Thank you.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Counselor Halpin, seconded by Counselor Connors, that staff be directed to incorporate a higher county roads reserve fund transfer for 2023 in the amount of $100,000.
Thank you. All those, council, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next issue is bylaw enforcement. If I could start before discussion, I could have a mover and a seconder on that, please. Counselor Connors. Counselor Halpin, thank you.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Counselor Connors, seconded by Counselor Halpin, that staff be directed to fund bylaw enforcement from parking revenues in the amount of $70,804.
Council discussion, please. Counselor Halpin.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Sloan. I wasn't sure what to think about this one because we know that we have some very large capital projects coming up, and this would remove the amount from the budget, but only by effectively costing us that money later when we go to do a capital project. Could we get a little bit more sort of insight on that from Archana?
Thank you. Mr. Graves and perhaps staff, I'll put it to Mr. Graves, please.
Yeah, I just want to mention that our treasurer is now on side, so she may be able to answer that.
Thank you. Ms. Gupta, did you hear the question from Counselor Halpin, please?
Yes, I did. And I really apologize for not being able to join earlier. So sorry about that. Give me 1 second. I'm trying to open the email. Give me 1 second, please. Lloyd, do you want to go ahead and answer for this one, please, as I open this file?
Sorry, Mr. Perrin, please. Thank you.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. So with respect to this item, it would be funding bylaw enforcement in its entirety from the paid parking revenue, which would in effect reduce the amount of money that council would be able to transfer into reserves for future projects. So Councillor Halpin is correct in that it would affect the ability to undertake capital works in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Graham, please.
I think that I don't see any problem with making this a net zero division here. I think that with the reduction in the paid parking spots that we have now with taking the Legion and the pharmacy back to non-paid parking, the reduction with one bylaw officer, that $70,000 doesn't seem much to be using to help reduce the budget. So I would agree with this.
Questions from other councillors, please? Thank you. Okay, if I could call the vote, please. Have you read it? Thanks. I'll go back to the normal way.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Councillor Connors, seconded by Councillor Halpin, that staff be directed to fund bylaw enforcement from parking revenues in the amount of $70,804.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Mr. Graves, Building Services.
Right, so maybe we could have the motion on the floor and then a little discussion. This one relates to directing a portion of administration offices, the lease to building service amount of 10,000. And again, the Director of Finance may have some comment on that.
So, Mr. Mayor, this one is actually the permit fees, not the tax levy. So this will be the building services funding from that. So it may not impact directly the tax levy, but somehow this savings would be used for other services.
I'm not sorry. Thanks, Mr. I don't quite understand that. Could you explain that to me, please?
So, you know how we have some of the user fees and some of the stuff is from the tax levy? Like some of our services are from user fees, like we get the fees and everything. So this particular one is from the fees, savings in the fees. And Mr. Lloyd can also help me to further explain how it would go with that. Lloyd, please.
Mr. Barron, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So in effect, when the municipality takes in a building permit, there's building fees attached to that. Those building fees are meant to cover the cost of the building department. In the past, the building, the space occupied in the municipal office by the building department has been funded through the general tax levy. So what we could do, we did a calculation based on square footage of the building or of the total office space compared to what the building services uses. And in effect, what we're saying is we can take $10,000 off the tax supported budget and put it into the building services and have it funded through the building permit fees. So it's still, there's no additional expense. Really what we're doing is moving the expense from the tax supported budget and taking it out of the building permit fees that we collect and show it as an expense to the building department.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. Councillor Halpin, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Sloan, to Mr. Perrin. So at present, the building permit fees that are surplus at the end of the year, are they in a reserve?
Mr. Barron, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Halpin. Yeah, that's correct. So any surplus that's generated from building permit fees compared to what our expenses are goes into a building permit and building department reserve. And essentially, the municipality is not able to make profit off of building permit fees. Every 5 years, the municipality undertakes a building permit and a service review, looks at our total costs, looks at the average amount of building that comes in over every year over that 5-year period, and then establishes permit fees. So there are some years that we may generate more revenue from permit fees, some years less. And if whatever difference is made up through that reserve fund.
Questions or comments? Do I get a mover and a seconder, please? Counselor Bachman, Counselor Halpin.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Counselor Bogman, seconded by Counselor Halpin, that staff be directed to transfer a portion of the administration office's lease to building services in the amount of $10,000.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Fire equipment for discussion, council. Staff want to comment on it, or Counselor Graham, you've got your hand up. Counselor Graham, please.
Hi, Chief Omrod. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the chief. What I was thinking about in this area, Chief, was that we don't purchase the ATV this year, use the current ATV that we have. I know it's not ideal for a stretcher, but I did see that it can actually carry one. And then if we're doing a $45,000 savings from reserves, we would look at probably like the jaws of life. That's what we're looking at purchasing, right? Obviously vital to the work that you do. So I would be okay with that, and potentially the drying rack. I know the fellas, if they have 2 different calls, their suits get pretty wet. And so a drying rack would probably be beneficial. So that's what I would recommend, if that's okay with you, Chief, that we save that $45,000 in reserves. That way we'd be saving 36, and we buy the combi tool and the drying rack out of the reserves. And that way we'd be saving $36,000 off the actual tax levy.
Thank you, Thank you, Counselor Graham. Chief, did you wish to speak to that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe, and the finance director can correct me, under the fire equipment, from my understanding, this is to reduce the maintenance budget of the fire equipment. So the maintenance for the vehicles would be coming from the reserves. Is that not correct, Archana?
That is correct. That is correct. It's a maintenance budget.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Counselor Halpin, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Sloan. There are a lot of things here that I was really happy with as suggestions, but I find the idea of deliberately cutting the maintenance on our fire equipment concerning, in that it could create more capital expenses later if things wear out more quickly, and also that if something is in for service when it didn't need to be, and it can't respond to an emergency, that's something that really directly affects the people that live here.
Thank you. Council, questions, comments? Counselor Graham, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the chief. Chief, are we above the maintenance schedules, or, do we go above and beyond? Is there some room, some play there at all?
Chief.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Currently, when the vehicles go in, they only go in for required maintenance. I will tell you, there was one component that, according to National Fire Protection Association, their best practices, the tires, for example, are supposed to be or should be replaced on a 7-year basis. They had not been done for a number of years. So last year we started to proceed through that to get them up to where they should be. That is one of those components that's not legislatively mandated for a vehicle, for a fire apparatus, but in the event that there was an incident, that is one of the items that they would look at. So to say that, as you had asked, are we going above and beyond? We're maintaining the minimum requirements for the safety features of the vehicles. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Questions or comments? Counselor Watson, please.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. We are to you, Fire Chief Ray. We're still maintaining our fire equipment, right? And it's just, we're going to do it by going into our reserves to maintain everything. So I think we're still going to be hitting our mark here. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Counselor Watson. Mr. Perrin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Maybe just a general comment, and realizing that, this is all new to council, but a thing to consider is that when you're budgeting and you start funding your operations out of reserves, unless you continue with that process. So if you fund 50,000 in operational costs this year out of reserves, next year you have to make up that $50,000 in order on the tax rate, so it doesn't hit the reserve again. And if not, your reserves will continually be depleted down. So just a general comment.
Thank you, Mr. Perrin. Counselor Halpin.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Sloan. I do think it's also important for everyone to understand that your reserves, when you have large capital or major works to do, is what helps you not to create wild swings for the taxpayers where you do 1% one year and 12 the next. Because when you've got larger projects, you are able to draw, as it has been proposed from Front Street, for example, with the money set aside there. So there is a value in having that so that you don't suddenly and unexpectedly hurt people the following year when something gets to be a lot worse. And the other thing to know about reserves is that right now we are well below the provincial average for reserves. We have far less saved in, I believe, all categories right now than most of our neighbors do.
Thank you, Councillor Halpin. Councillor. Oh, sorry, I thought I said it.
Through you, Mayor. Fire Chief, what does the reserve look like right now? How much is in that reserve? If we play this $40,000, how much will be left in the reserve? Did we add any into the reserve last year? How does it look at this point?
Chief.
If I could, your worship, if I could defer that to the treasurer for the exact numbers.
Thank you. Ms. Gupta Harit, please.
Yes, I'm getting that number. Give me 1 second, please.
Councillor Connors.
In addition, Archana, when you're looking at it, typically what do we use for this type of maintenance every year? So
I
is
will
it
provide
40,000 a
that.
year? Is it 40 a year? How does it look per year?
So to answer the first question, Mayor, the reserve currently looks at 616,405 for the fire vehicle and equipment. And the yearly expense, normally this is like the maintenance, right? And this is coming from the tax levy and all that stuff. As we are saying, we can reduce it by 50,000 from the operational budget. However, when we go into reserves, this also would be used whenever we need to buy the fire vehicles or any other equipments, like for example, your drying rack or something like those things. If we dip into that, and I also want to remind you that we will be using this kind of equipment and fire vehicle for the next couple of years when we go and buy the area. So just a heads up on that, because we'll need that money from this account as well. I'm getting you the annual number.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Councillor Watson, please.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Sloan. In this report, it's a $40,000 line item, and then on this piece of paper here, it's a $50,000. So I want to know which one I'm voting on or the right amount. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson.
I believe it should be 40,000 and not 50,000 as a type. Yeah, it's a good pickup.
The list that I provided is correct, Deputy Mayor Todd.
Thank you.
Can we continue to the next item because it needs to add up a lot of accounts? So I'll get you the answer for the annual expense.
I need a mover in a sector though, don't I? Sorry, we'll go back.
Yeah, I guess in order to address the question to answer this one, we'll just suspend that motion for a minute and we'll come back to it once the treasurer has that, and we can go to the next item if that's okay.
Okay with council?
If council agrees, we'll just move to the next one and then we'll come back if that's okay.
Our next is number 6, fire fleet transfer. For discussion, please. Chief, did you have anything to say on this?
Yes, your worship, if you will. What you're doing here is you're drawing from the reserve fleet for, as it says there, potential operations, continued increased capital costs. The concern that I have as your fire chief at this point in time with this specific component is in 2026, under the asset management plan, there are 3 vehicles in which need to be replaced as they're reaching their end life. So as was expressed earlier, if we continue to draw from that reserve in 2026, there's going to be a significant impact to that reserve cost if council approves the vehicle replacement at that time.
Thanks, Chief. Are those 3 vehicles all fire trucks?
2 of them are fire trucks. One is the 27-foot Zodiac, the rescue boat. If you bear with me for a moment, I can tell you which fire trucks those are.
Curious if it was fire trucks. I don't need the specific model, but thank you. Questions or comments from council? Councillor Connors.
Through you, Mayor, it'd be nice to know, Chief, too, what the costs that you're anticipating at that time for these vehicles. And, you know, I mean, does it all have to happen in 1 year? Can we spread it? But what costs are you looking for or looking at?
Thank you, Councillor Connors. Chief?
Through your worship, as I recall, we're looking at it the other day was $1.5 million. The Zodiac boat, I would suggest could be put off at this point in time. The issue with the fire vehicles themselves is any vehicle beyond 20 years of age in the fire service, fire underwriters will not recognize that vehicle as a fire service apparatus, in which case insurance rates begin to climb for the municipality.
Thank you, Chief. Councillor Connors, please.
My point there is could we look at one in advance of, you know, in other words, we could separate it that way, do one in advance, 1 year in advance, and do the second one. So we split it up that way.
Thank you, Chief.
Through your worship, yes, it can be reallocated. Again, you can move them forward. The issue becomes if you move them beyond a 20-year lifespan, then it becomes a hurdle, with the exception of the Zodiac boat. The Zodiac boat is not included as a fire suppression vehicle.
And it's 1.5 million per vehicle or 1.5 total?
To your worship, it was 1.5 total. That being said, those numbers are a few years out of date. So I would have to get you updated numbers for the 2026.
Fair enough. And how would you dispose of the existing units? Would you sell them off?
Through your worship, yes, they generally go to auction.
So there would be revenue coming back then?
Please.
There would be, yes. That being said, used fire trucks do not bring nearly the percentage amount as what they are when they are new.
Thank you, Chief. Councillor Connors, any other questions or comments, please? Councillor Graham.
I just have a for information question from the chief. Who's buying those 20-year-old fire trucks?
Chief?
Through your worship, it's difficult to say. I have found in times farmers, for example, or gravel pits enjoy having the tanker trucks because they can put an apparatus on the back to be able to release the water to keep the dust down. The pumps, for example, there is generally not a big request for pumps, so it would usually go to a private investor looking for an antique vehicle to have for display.
Thank you, Chief. Councillor Halpin.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Sloan. So this again, to me, looks like a situation of we could save the money right now, but if we do, then we will make it significantly worse for the years that these issues come up.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? Seeing none, if I could get a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Connors. Would anyone second? Councillor Graham.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Councillor Connor, seconded by Councillor Graham, that staff be directed to reduce, that should read reduce, the maintenance budget for the 16 fire fleet apparatus in the amount of $40,000.
Mr. Graves, please.
So I think we had passed that motion. We're on the next one because the treasurer was getting us the information on that. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
My apologies. Moved by Councillor Connor, seconded by Councillor Graham, that staff be directed to reduce the annual fire fleet contribution to reserves in the amount of $50,000.
Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion fails.
Mr. Mayor, I do have the information for the fire equipment, 40,000, the annual expense, if I may, please.
Thank you. One moment. Is the motion on the floor? Or do I have to redo it with the movers? Well, please go on and then we don't have a motion. Good for discussion. Thank you, Ms. Gupta-Reed. If you proceed, please. Thanks.
Thank you. So just for the fire fleet, for the repairs and maintenance and parts and supplies for the fleet, in 2022, we spent about 73,000 in total.
Thank you. Questions or comments from council? We're back just to make sure on number 4, or sorry, number 5.
Number 5, for the 40,000 in fire equipment.
All right. If so, if I could have a mover and a seconder, please. If I could have a mover and a seconder. No? Okay. Thank you. Councillor Connors, Councillor Graham.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Councillor Connors, seconded by Councillor Graham, that staff be directed to reduce the maintenance budget for the 16 fire fleet apparatus in the amount of $40,000.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion fails. Number 7, fire capital. Chief, did you want to speak to this, or council have any questions before the chief speaks? Councillor Graham, please.
So just what I said. Thank you, Mr. Chief Omrad.
Thank you.
To your worship, yes. If you were to, as it says, eliminate the combi tool and the apparatus devices, the electronic apparatus devices, that would not be that big of an issue for us.
Councillor Graham.
So just to refresh, because I was on the wrong page there. So not have the $45,000 out of reserves for the ATV that we currently have an ATV that actually does hold a stretcher on the back. And instead of having that $45,000 out of reserves, we'd take the $36,000 that were, or actually not all of it, just the Jaws of Life and potentially the drying rack. I've heard it's quite, from all my talk with the firefighters in Port Stanley, I heard it's quite important to have that for them. But that way we'd be saving $36,000 because those two items would come out of reserves. And then we'd be delaying the electronic device as well. So that would be $36,000 off the current budget. And that's something that I would support completely.
Thank you. Chief, comments or questions from council? If I could get a mover and a seconder, please. Oh, I have a mover and a second. Did I have a mover and a seconder on this one? Not for number 7. If I could get a mover and a seconder. Last time I had some hesitation, so you've thrown me out of whack. Councillor Halpin and Councillor Bachman. Thank you.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Councillor Halpin, seconded by Councillor Bogman, that staff be directed to eliminate funding for capital items FD04, the e-combi tool Yarmouth Center, and FD05, the fire apparatus electronic devices, in the amount of $22,000.
Councillor Graham.
Sorry, I'm just wondering if we can amend that to be the additional tools so that it takes us to $36,000. So it would be all 3 tools. Mr. Graves, is that okay?
And just before Mr. Graves, it says here that staff be directed to maintain funding for capital items FD04. I just wanted to point that out. Mr. Graves, please.
So first of all, on your point, Mr. Mayor, that's I think the motion actually is eliminate. We're matching up the wording on the chart with, so that should say eliminate. And I believe that's the way that the deputy clerk read it on the motion. So I think I'm going to have to ask the treasurer to comment on the changing of the boxes with the funding that you're suggesting, because she would have more insight into that.
Thank you. Ms. Gupta-Reed, please.
So if I may, Mr. Mayor, there are 2 things, and fire chief would help me with that. One of the things that why we needed the ATV is because it's also used to take the rescue boats when we go into the beaches and everything. So I would need first fire chief to agree that we could actually potentially say that, okay, we really don't need ATV at this point. And the other piece is that this particular one is only for e-combi tool and the fire apparatus, the electronic one. So these are not really the tax levy capital items as it is identified in the asset management plan. So, you know, the efficiency and service maintenance could potentially be deferred. So I'm looking at fire chief to help me with further with that before I would say we could amend or not. Fire chief, please.
Through you, your worship. As Councillor Graham had stated, we do currently have a UTV device that does have a stretcher capability. The UTV device that you see here in your capital aspect contains a stretcher device as well as a fire suppression component to it for trails and such. We just did some maintenance on that UTV because we were not sure where things would go. So the UTV that we currently have in our possession will suffice for us at this point.
Thank you, Chief. Councillor Graham?
So, I mean, thank you, Chief, for that. So what we would be looking at is potentially adding the drying rack, taking that from reserves instead of the levy, and the e-combi RAM tool, the Jaws of Life, for the $10,000, and doing that from putting that in reserves instead. So the $14,000 for the drying rack would come off of the tax levy. The $10,000 for the e-combi RAM tool would come off the tax levy, and the fire apparatus electronic devices we wouldn't be purchasing for $12,000. That's a total of $36,000. If we can amend that box, then it'd be $36,000 off of the tax levy.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. Is that
If
Ms. Gupta?
Mr.
Reid,
Mayor?
would you- Yep.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if you give me a couple of minutes, I'll get you a new item and we'll go for that, and it does work. So I'll get you the new wording for that. If we can just discard this one, and I'll get you a new item, and that way it will be like properly line by line item we would work with.
Okay, so Councillor Halpin, please.
Thank
Sorry.
you. Through you. Before we go and rewrite anything, I'm open to doing a friendly amendment on the motion that we have on the floor to include getting the UTV off of the list for this year. But I really don't see the value of deliberately pushing things into reserves that are on tax levy at this time, because all that we're going to do is make this all cost more for our payers next year. And that's not really a service to them if they get sudden and unexpected jumps.
Councillor Graham. Thank you, Councillor Halpin.
We're actually saving money on the reserves with this because we're only putting into the reserves 24,000 when we've just taken out of the reserves 45,000. So it's actually bumping up the reserve. It's not actually taking any money off the reserve. So there's actually more in there still.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. Are we going to move to the next and then come back like we did to give Ms. Gupta some time, or how do you want to go about this?
If council is in concurrence, we'll just skip over this one, go to the next one, and then our treasurer can work out the numbers for that. If that's okay with council,
Thank you.
by consensus, good. Yeah.
Great. Fire and Emergency Services. This is relatively straightforward. Any questions or comments from council? Seeing none, if I could get a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Halpin.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Councillor Halpin, seconded by Deputy Mayor Noble, that staff be directed to reduce technical rescue training and equipment funding in the amount of $10,000.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion fails. Fire and Emergency Services. Any questions or comments? Yep, Councillor Halpin, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Sloan, to Chief Omarad. How often does this come up for us that we have confined space rescues?
Chief?
Through you, your worship. Not that often. Now, understanding that confined space rescues includes a variety of different components. It could be one of our staff in a sewer pipe, area vault, somewhere like that. But it also include the confined space rescue also includes our silo rescue program. So for the rural areas, someone entrapped in a green bin, which we did assist one in I believe it was 2021. We did assist with one outside of our municipality.
Thank you, Chief. Any other questions or comments? If I can get a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Bachman, Councillor Halpin, thank you. Ms. Leach?
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads. Moved by Counselor Bogman, seconded by Counselor Halpin, that staff be directed to reduce technical rescue training and equipment funding in the amount of $10,000.
It is very hard to follow. I'm sorry. All those in favor? Yep. Sorry. If we could reread it, please. Thank you. Thank you, Counselor Watson.
Moved by Counselor Bogman, seconded by Counselor Halpin, that staff be directed to reduce technical rescue training and equipment funding in the amount of $10,000.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion fails. Mr. Graves, please.
Yes, so we actually skipped over number 8. So we need to go back to number 8, which was the honorarium from calls. And then once we deal with number 8, we'll go back, if the treasurer is ready, to the one that we had left behind before. So I think we deal with number 8 next.
Thank you,
which
Mr.
is the
Graves.
Honorarium.
Fire and Emergency Services. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, if I could get a mover and a seconder. Counselor Connors. Counselor Halpin.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Counselor Connors, seconded by Counselor Halpin, that staff be directed to reduce the firefighter honorarium from calls in the amount of $10,000.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion fails.
Mr. Mayor, if I may interrupt, I do have the motion ready. If I may read, please.
If you proceed, please. Thank you, Ms. Gupta-Harit.
So it would read as amend the motion to remove the UTV purchase of $45,000 FD03 in 2023 and the fire apparatus electronic devices of $12,000 FD05 and fund the drying rack for $14,000 FD02 and e-combi tool $10,000 FD04 from reserve instead of tax levy. And I can send this to Ms. Delaney and also other members if they are on, they're working through their laptops.
Mr. Graves.
I'm just wondering if the treasurer could confirm what the net financial result of that is, so that we understand that by
Yeah.
making those moves.
And that is net $36,000. That, as
Thank you.
Councillor Graham said, in tax levy savings.
Very good. Now I need a mover and a seconder for this one. Counselor Connor, Deputy Mayor Noble. While we're waiting, if it's the will of council, we'll move to another item and come back if that's okay. Number
Ms.
10,
Leach,
sorry.
sorry, Mr. Mayor, Ms. Leach, you should have it.
Okay.
I just
thank
sent it
you.
over.
We'll go back to where we were. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Councillor Connors, seconded by Deputy Mayor Noble, that staff be directed to amend the motion to remove the UTV purchase of $45,000 FD03 in 2023 and the fire apparatus electronic devices of $12,000 FD05 and fund the drying rack $14,000 FD02 and e-combi tool $10,000 FD04 from reserve instead of the tax levy, resulting in a net $36,000 in tax levy savings.
Point of order on that. We did already have a motion on the floor before this. So before we suspended this, there was a motion on the floor.
Oh, on this one?
Right. And I did say that I was willing to do a friendly amendment on it, but we've sort of overridden that and just completely written a new motion.
Thank you. Mr. Graves?
Well, I guess to simplify everything, it would, as a mover and a seconder of that original motion, prepared to remove from the table and deal with this new motion.
Thank you.
Thank
Councillor
you.
Halpin?
Through you, Mayor Sloan. As I said before, I would be more than happy for us to add the UTV to the original motion by friendly amendment. But I think that we are hurting our residents by deliberately moving things to the reserves in order to create steeper rises and falls in their tax rates. So I'm not willing to add that as a friendly amendment.
Thank you. Mr. Graves?
So what I would suggest procedurally is that we, if we deal with that motion that would then be on the floor, and then if it fails, then you can deal with the new motion.
Thank you. Councillor, do you have a seconder for your motion?
The original seconder would have to decide whether they're willing also to make a friendly amendment or whether the original motion stands.
Thank you. Councillor Blackman? Okay. Mr. Graves?
So if you could just read that original motion, and then we'll make sure we've got the amendment correct, and then council can vote on that.
Mayor Sloan, the original motion reads, moved by Councillor Halpin, seconded by Councillor Bogman, that staff be directed to eliminate funding for capital items FD04, e-combi tool Yarmouth Center, and FD05, fire apparatus electronic devices in the amount of $22,000.
And then I believe there was the amendment, the amendment was, if you just restate that, please.
Thank you. Yes, and the friendly amendment to that was that we could also eliminate the UTV item.
So that would be the motion on the floor then.
Should we read it again, just to be clear? Thank you.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Councillor Halpin, seconded by Councillor Bogman, that staff be directed to eliminate funding for capital items FD04, e-combi tool Yarmouth Center, and FD05, fire apparatus electronic devices, and FD03 UTV in the amount of $22,000. $45,000. $67,000.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving to number 10, parks. Any questions? Mr. Brooks, please.
Just a couple comments. The Blue Flag program is carried through the beach's operational budget. Application for the Blue Flag has to be done in January, so that application plus the fee has already been paid for. So I would suggest that it may not be an option to throw this one out for 2023. However, it's something that council could consider for 2024. Staff would just need to know by November if they wish to reduce that level of service.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. Any questions or comments from council? Seeing none, if I could get a mover and a seconder. Councillor Bachman and Councillor Connors.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Councillor Bogman, seconded by Councillor Connors, that staff be directed to eliminate funding for participation in the Blue Flag Beach program in the amount of $4,000.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion does not make it. Number 11, Parks. Portable washrooms. Questions or comments from council? Councillor Halpin.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Sloan, this strikes me as an accessibility issue. There are lots of families and lots of people who would not be able to comfortably use our parks if they didn't think they were going to be able to use the washroom while they were there.
Thank you. Councillor Connors, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to add to that, I think that it mostly would be the elderly people that would have an issue with this. So, yes.
If I get questions or comments, anyone else? If I get a mover and a seconder. Councillor Watson. Deputy Mayor Noble.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Councillor Watson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Noble, that staff be directed to eliminate funding for the provision of portable washrooms in the municipality in the amount of $55,000.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion fails. Sorry, waste management. Questions or comments from council? Seeing none, if I could have a mover and a seconder for this, please. Councillor Connors. Councillor Halpin.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Councillor Connors, seconded by Councillor Halpin, that staff be directed to eliminate funding for the spring and fall leaf and yard waste program in the amount of $35,000.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion fails. Mr. Graves, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think what would be helpful to all of us in council, sure, is if we just through the treasurer just did a summary of where we're at, having gone through that sheet, and then she can calculate what that looks like in the total numeric value and how that impacts tax rate. So I'll just read my list to make sure and then make sure the treasurer has it, and then we've got it. So as I see it, council was in concurrence with the $100,000 adjustment relating to the county roads system. That was the first one. And that the $70,804 for parking for bylaw enforcement come from the reserves. That the $10,000 adjustment be made to the administration office lease. And we dealt with the fire capital, which we have that information. And I think that was it in terms of the list. So I'm hoping that the treasurer has all those numbers, that she could do her wizardry with a calculation, and council will know where we're at.
Thank you. Ms. Gupta Harit, please.
Coming in a minute,
Thank
in
you.
a couple of seconds. Mr. Mayor, if I may confirm one thing, and that is that we are looking at the fire apparatus decrease was 22K, and plus the original motion of the removal of UTV from reserves. I just need to confirm, Ms. Leach. So we decreased 67,000 in total, 45,000 from the reserves and 22,000 from the list.
That's correct. I have 67,000 in total.
Thank you. So this, then after all the maths, the tax levy would amount, the current tax levy would amount to 202,804, and the tax rate would be 2.54 at this point then.
Questions or comments? Counselor Graham.
I have some, if Mr. Graves, if this is the right time for it, I have some additional items that I'd like to mention to look for reductions.
Counselor Graham, please.
So looking at removal of a certain amount, 5 to 20,000 for the additional conference budget. I know you had said that some staff require it. So I'd like to know what percentage of that is required and what is a choice, and as well for council is Archana. And as well, looking at what I'm proposing would be the Front Street project. So if we're looking at completing that over the course of 2023 to 2024, that instead of on our current budget, we'd have, instead of having 2.1 million, we'd have 1.5 million for 2023, and then have 600,000 for 2024, which would give us a cost savings of 500 to 600,000 in this year. Whether we do it over the course of the winter, which as we said, would be cheaper, or if we do it all in 2024. So that would increase the slashing of the budget by $500,000. As well, looking at the reduction of one recycling person. As we offload the recycling program, it seems to me, since we're offloading a truck and offloading all the service and recycling, that we should be offloading, unfortunately, one personnel persons, because we're not doing that service anymore. So it seemed to me to be logical to reduce the amount of personnel that we have for that program. I'm wondering what the cost savings would would be as well, Archana.
Thank you, Counselor Graham. Ms. Gupta, read, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. As we are speaking, I'm trying to get the numbers as well. So one thing I would say for the when you see the general budget for the trainings and conferences, some of our staff, for example, the manager of tax and revenue, Opta conferences must for them because they kind of do those kind of things. And when you say exactly the number, it's last year we had about $6,000 spent for the conferences for those particular purposes. And I may want to mention that sometimes our staff uses online, not necessarily going into the conferences, so that saves a little bit of travel and everything. So I would say you could reduce it by 3,000 or something, but not really 10,000 on that. And I also want to mention that it is CEO's office as well as the finance department that covers for all the conferences for the staff who may go there. So $3,000 would be the best I could say you could reduce by not allowing people to travel, but they would have to attend these conferences.
Just if I might, Ms. Gupta, on the council, when you're talking about conventions, the increase from 2022 to 2023 is from 204,000 to 222,000. So there's a budget of $204,000 available currently, correct?
That is correct. When we are talking about the council, as I mentioned in my email, it's not just the conferences. It was only 10,000 for the conferences, then 10,000 for the consulting, and 10,000 for there was one more item. Give me 1 second. I'm opening the email. So there were 3 different items. It's not just the council, conferences for all the 22,000.
I respect, yes. But I just say when we've got a budget of, it's not like the budget's going down. The budget is $204,000 last year, and it's up $18,000 this year, correct? Or the proposed number is $18,000 more, which is about 10%. So it goes from 204,000 to 222,624, legal, travel and conventions, advisory boards and committees.
So that is correct, because legal services, if I may, for 2022, the budget was only $1,000. whereas the actual for 2022 is 18,377. So when we did it in September, it was little less. So we budgeted it for $10,000 for the legal services. So it's not for the council. Similarly, consulting was $5,000. We budgeted it for $10,000. And I want to mention that council has already spent $15,000 in Q1 of this year for the budget against the budgeted amount of $10,000. Similarly, travel and conventions, 22 budget was $5,000, spent was 16,026. However, with the new council coming in, we as staff assumed that new council would probably be looking at more kind of going into these conventions and everything and travel and meet their new colleagues or learn more about it. So that was the only reason. And I would want to mention that with the attendance of AMO, the council has already spent about $3,000, $4,000 in that area as well. So that is the total
Thank
net
you.
of 18,000.
Counselor Graham, please.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, to Archana, I'm assuming that there was a certain budgeted amount for conferences in 2022. Can you tell me what that amount was?
$5,000 only.
$5,000? And what's the
That is
additional
correct.
amount? What's the additional amount for this year, for the 2023, please?
So the legal was $1,000 for 2022 budgeted. The actuals as of November 30th was 18,377. So we budgeted about $10,000 for that. And consulting was $5,000. We added another $5,000 to consulting. So the budgeted amount is 10,000.
Counselor Graham.
Sorry, Archana, if you can just, it's a bit fuzzy in my ear. So a previous amount for, I'm just talking about conferences here. So previous amount for conferences for the previous council was $5,000.
That is correct.
So that I'm assuming would be on this one as well. So what additional amount have you added in this budget just for conferences for the current council?
$5,000.
Okay, so there's,
5,000.
okay.
Thank you.
And,
5,000 has been added.
If I may, yes, if I may, we added that because in 2022, the budget was based on 2020 and 2021 when we were still in under COVID and nobody was traveling. In 2022, we assumed people would be traveling, so that was it was increased, as well as the new council was coming in. So we were hoping that, and that's the $5,000 only.
Thank you. Counselor Graham.
And sorry, just to conferences again, could you get us the numbers for the amount of required conferences for staff? The cost of the required ones and versus the cost of the chosen ones?
Ms. Gupta, rate, please.
Yeah, Mayor Sloan, the required ones, as I mentioned last year, was about $5,000 that were spent. And I can't tell on top of my head whether the staff actually attended in person or online, but it is $5,000 that was actually spent. So I was suggesting that we only leave, could decrease $3,000, not necessarily all the 5,000, sorry, all the 10,000.
Questions or comments? Counselor Bachman, please.
I don't want to dwell on the conference expense. It was more of the Front Street, reducing that. I would have an issue with that. Personally, I would rather have the money there and not use it than next year get there and say, oh, we need twice as much. We're dealing with a lot of unknown numbers for next year. I would rather have that money there knowing that it might be more than we need, but I would sooner have that money in my pocket than have to make it up next year and not know what the unknown numbers are. So I would like to see the Front Street budget not get touched and just moved on to next year.
Thank you, Counselor Bachman. Deputy Mayor Noble.
As far as Front Street, I realize it's a bit of a bone of contention. I'm happy to see it be retendered and see where it comes in and possibly take some of the money, put it into reserves, and some of the money we'll take out of next year when we actually get a chance to do it possibly.
Counselor Halpin, please.
Thank you. I think it's worth pointing out that how we choose to move forward with Front Street is not at this point on our agenda as far as direction to give to staff. And if we change our budget for it without actually having resolved about what we're going to do, then either we're doing a straw vote here, which really we're not allowed to do, or we're potentially setting up a budget that we're not capable of acting on. So I'm frustrated that we as counselors have the right to an efficient meeting, that there has been a week's notice since the last meeting and 5 months since we started, and we are now having this conversation about numbers that could have been pulled anytime this week and provided to us. And I'm frustrated that this is being brought up as though we should vote about it right now when we really can't.
Councillor Graham, please.
Through you, Mayor Sloan, I'm not proposing that we vote on anything. What I'm saying is that these are the potential areas that we can bring this down to an understandable and more acceptable level for our tax levy. I don't think that we should be having a final budget vote today, because I do think we need to have the Front Street issue voted on at the next agenda if possible, so that we have that resolved and we can talk about when we're going to be having, whether we're sending it out for tender or doing negotiation on it. But there is the potential saving, as Deputy Mayor Noble said, of the $500,000. If we're either looking at doing it in 2024 or looking and doing it over the course of the winter, which seems to be, from the construction folks' opinion, would be a large cost saving over the course of the winter. So again, we're not voting on anything. What I'm just saying is that we're proposing this because we're not going to be, if we're retendering it, they said the best time to retender was in the fall. And that way it wouldn't be done until the crossover of 2022, 2023, 2024. And again, would provide great cost savings to us in both years.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. Councillor Halpin.
Thank you. Point of privilege, Your Worship. We do have the right to an efficient meeting and to informed decision-making. And there was nothing to stop the councillor from adding a motion of reconsideration to our last regular meeting if she wished to, so that we could discuss Front Street. Instead, she's bringing it to us now. And if we were to bring forward this change, we are changing our budget in a way that we're not necessarily able to follow through on, because we really have not examined all of the points, even of doing winter work. And so this is completely, I mean, the idea of talking about this budget point when we don't even know whether it's a viable option for us or not is absurd.
Respectfully, Councillor Halpin, it is a general discussion about the budget. I think that the people that are here tonight are interested in opportunities that we can find to work with staff to best represent the ratepayer. I don't think it's, I mean, it's a general discussion of the budget, and I don't think the comments that we have in this regard are untoward. Oh, Councillor Halpin.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Sloan. The suggestion in and of itself, with proper notice and proper consideration for the parts connected to it, would not be problematic. But we're suggesting now deferring this budget resolution again because the councillor didn't want to contact staff in advance, provide the information that she would like to have numbers run on, and have that presented to us in advance, as has been done with all of these other numbers and as has been asked of us multiple times.
Thank you, Councillor Halpin. I don't know if the councillor has been in touch with staff. She perhaps has. I can let her answer. But overall, I think it's a general budget discussion we're having, and I hope we can continue to have a respectful conversation about it. Councillor Graham or Deputy Mayor Noble.
When we're talking about the budget though, and we're talking about where we're putting, if we're putting money in reserves and we're not putting money in reserves, I believe that was the question. And we're just talking about stuff in general. So if we're thinking that we can save a little bit of money going into reserve this year and put a little bit extra in next year, then that's basically what the question was.
Thank you. Mr. Perrin.
Just a general comment, if I may, Mr. Mayor. So
Yes, sir.
right now, if council refers to page 126 of your budget document, that's the 2023 capital summary. And that lays out the tax supported capital for the municipality. Well, actually all the capital projects for the municipality for 2023 and where it's funded from. If you look at that last column, council has in this 2023 budget, $3.191 million of tax supported capital work. And of that, now this could potentially change with the motion that council reviewed earlier with respect to the fire apparatus, but of that 3.191 million, 36,000 of that is tax levy for fire department capital, and 3.155 is roads capital. When you go back and I have an obligation to inform council, you make the decision, but based on asset management principles and regulation 588.17, councils across Ontario have to take and operate under the guiding principles that you're not reducing the level of condition of your assets. When you do that, there's that will affect the municipality long-term, because the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund, which is a non-conditional grant, will be affected, because you will not be able to show the province that you are maintaining your assets at an acceptable condition. So based on, whatever council does with respect to reduction of tax supported capital. So for example, if you reduce $3.1 million in roads tax supported capital by $500,000, that means, one, you're not going to be able to exhibit that to the province that you're maintaining your asset and you're providing the capital expenditure level that's identified in your asset management plan that's already been approved and conforms to regulation 588.17. If you do that and you reduce, say, 500,000 this year, that means you will have to increase that by $1 million next year, because you have to make up the 500,000 that you reduced this year and another 500,000 next year, because you still have the same amount of work coming at you, and you're also going to be faced with inflationary costs. So again, council can do what you like. It's your prerogative to do that. Staff just has to make you aware that making those types of cuts in capital expenditure will have other impacts on funding that the municipality has the ability to obtain, like the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund.
Thanks, Mr. Perrin. The last council delayed this project as well, if I'm correct.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, you're correct. They delayed. The point that I'm trying to make, though, is that the overall funding envelope that they funded through the tax supported budget did not change. Like they were still funding approximately $3 million every year for roads capital. The reason that they put it over 2 years is that we knew as staff and recommended to them as staff that in order to fund the entire project in 2022, you would end up, or they would be in a position, the municipality would be in a position to either increase the tax supported component for the 2022 budget, or to take money out of reserves. So the conscious decision was made is as a municipality, let's maintain some consistency with our expenditure level, approximately $3 million in roads capital tax supported projects. We'll reserve the amount of money that we can to go towards the Front Street and defer it over 2 years. So what council has before you in the 2023 proposed budget on page 126 is $3.155 million worth of tax supported capital dollar expenditure for roads, of which that includes a portion for Front Street. It also includes roads resurfacing, like surface treatment and hot mix paving.
Thank you. Councillor Graham.
Well, when we had already voted to retender this, we were considering voting or retendering it in the fall. So I don't see, I understand what Mr. Perrin is saying, but at the same time, if it's over the course of, 1 month in 2024 versus, it's supposed to be taking 2 to 3 months. So if it's November, December, January, whatever, or October, November, December, I don't see the detriment that it's going to be if it's over the course of 3 months, including the winter months of 2023 and 2024. And I understand there's some capital costs for the following year as well. So to me, again, it seems like we're saving a lot of money for our ratepayers, and it's of more benefit to the ratepayers to make this judgment call. But again, not looking to vote on it. It's just an option that we can consider to attempt to get the tax rate or the tax rate down again.
Thank you. Mr. Graves and then Councillor Bachman.
Just a fairly simplified comment from my side, and I think we covered this a little bit last time. It's my understanding that this municipality has tried to keep a relative, because of constraints, flatlined of about $3 million of tax-based capital projects on the go for quite a few years. Now, I've not seen the data, but I believe that's about where they've been, $3 million. So, and that's we talked about the importance of, we're all gonna get tired of hearing about asset management plans, but that's just the word that the province looks to see how you're managing that stuff. So that's kind of at keeping it in threads kind of thing, the asset management plan. So over the course of time. So in that bucket of $3 million, the projects can change, dramatically from year to year in terms of what they are. It's just trying to have an equation that kind of resembles that $3 million. And if you dive way below that, then as Mr. Perrin has stated, there'll be a catch-up year at some point in time, but that is council's prerogative, just as long as you understand the principle of that tax-supported capital side of the business.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. Councillor Bachman.
All due respect, I believe the detriment has been identified by Mr. Perrin. Through responsible asset management planning, we need to take a longer range view than just 4 months or 5 months or 6 months. We've got a plan for a large scale project that the previous council has already set aside money for, that we should continue to support, because Front Street, as we've identified, does need to be done. And we hope to get it done sooner than later. We can have that discussion as you guys wish to retender in November. But to support Mr. Perrin's comments, there is an identified detriment. And I'm not willing, as my ward representatives, to let this budget get deferred another month. We're now into April, approaching May. This season's almost half over, and we've got tenders we haven't put out yet. Well, we've got work that needs to be done, and it needed to be done 3 months ago, and yet we're still debating the Front Street issue that we've had countless discussions on. I lost, or didn't lose, but the discussion was that we're going to defer it. Okay, let's defer it, but let's not play with the numbers right now. Let's keep the funding responsible. Let's keep our asset managements responsible and show our constituents, or whatever you want to call our neighbors, that we are planning for this in the future and not robbing today and then paying more next year. So that's my point.
Thank you, Councillor Bachman. Quick comment on that. Mr. Perrin, we are still doing tenders like the dredging. We're moving forward. You bring them to council. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, actually, as I'm aware, the only tender that we've let is the dredging, because council provided us direction that we could go ahead and do that. We're, like I said before, we're in a holding pattern waiting for a budget approval. So we're not in a position where we can start tendering projects if we don't know what's in and what's out. Respectfully, we closed the dredging tender today.
Oh,
good news. So
well, thank you.
So what was budgeted at $4.5 million for the total project? The construction price came in at $2.744 million. So we're still evaluating that, but that does not include engineering and project management. And there's some options that council may wish to consider going forward when we bring that report forward to you at the next meeting of council.
Thank you, Mr. Perrin. Appreciate it. Councillor Graham.
So speaking to what they're talking about, the $3 million that we're usually around $3 million for our capital budget. So if the 2023 budget is at 3.15, and we're looking at reducing that by 500,000, putting away 15 or 1.5 million this year for the Front Street project, taking off approximately anywhere from $400,000 to $500,000 on that. That would take us down to about 2.7 million, $2.7 million, which seems to be exactly what the 2024 budget would be. So basically what we're doing is we're switching the 2024 detailed capital budget amount of 2.7 million to the 3.1 million. We're taking the 2023 detailed capital budget of 3.1 million down to 2.7 million. So we're basically staying at the same levels over the course of 2 years. We're just switching those 2 years. If you take a look at it. And again, potentially it can come in even cheaper if we're doing it over the winter, because that's what the construction fellows, the
Point
people
of
that are
order, your
going to be
worship.
doing, excuse me, don't interrupt me.
This
I'm
is what can
speaking.
interrupt. Point of order may interrupt.
Well, I'm still speaking. So
Thank you, Councillor Halpin. Let's let Councillor Graham just finish and I'll be
Thank
right
you.
with you.
thank you. So that's why I'm proposing that this is going to help us with our tax base and help us with reducing our tax rate and help our ratepayers. Because the number one thing we need to be doing every year in every decision we make is looking at how is this going to benefit our ratepayers by keeping the tax rate down.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. Councillor Halpin, please.
Thank you through you, your worship. The councillor may not justify and debate her motion unless she has a motion and it is properly moved and seconded.
I think we can have general budget discussion, can we not?
Through you, your worship, then I believe that it should be a motion to direct staff to eliminate or defer or whatever else, as we have just done with all of our other motions.
Sorry, I was just thought there might be some more discussion on the actual item, but Mr. Perrin has his hand up, so let's talk to him. Thank you, Mr. Perrin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Just a point of clarification. So on page 126, to Councillor Graham's comment about 3.155 million for roads supported, tax supported roads capital. I would draw council's attention to the total tax supported capital for 2023. And that number is $3.191 million proposed right now as the budget sits. Okay. If I could draw you to page 127, and that's the 2024 capital summary. So what's being, forecast for 2024, while the roads tax supported capital is suggesting $2.7 million. I would draw your attention to the total proposed tax supported of $3.797 million. That's the reduction in the roads capital tax supported projects is lower for a reason, because as staff, we understand that there's other projects that are coming forward that is going to put pressure on the tax levy for 2024. So the roads was intentionally reduced in order to help mitigate the overall impact to Central Elgin ratepayers on their tax levy for 2024. You look at that, there's a tax levy of 693 that for fire department, another 350,000 for parks, and then 2.754 million for roads supported.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Noble, please.
I think it's important for us all to have some conversation about the whole budget and the budget as a process, because I think it's important to remember whose money we're spending. And I don't, I realize all these conversations are important, but I think this council was elected to be budget minded and look at overall costs. And I think it's important for us to be cordial and give everybody an opportunity to speak and have these conversations with staff and move forward in a nice, polite manner and remember whose money we're spending. Like it's honestly, we're all brand new at this, and we're elected as a new council because the community wanted change and their number one issue was costs. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Noble. Questions or comments? Councillor Watson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have to simplify this a whole lot, because if I was sitting at home, I'd be thinking, why can't those guys talk and get this straightened out? I wouldn't mind seeing us get done here tonight as well. How far away are we from being at zero? Can we not take that out of that tax levy for Front Street of 2.1 million? Get us to zero, and then whatever's left over in that tax levy, let's put it in the reserve to get that done in the future. Is that so hard to talk about? Can we make a motion to get that at zero? No, I'm getting there. if we made a motion to get to 0% tonight, and we go and take the remainder of that tax levy and use it as a reserve for that project down the road, then it'll make us all happy. We'll get the budget done and we'll be at 0. I think that's everything that we want to do tonight or going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Watson. Questions, comments, Councillor Graham?
Agree 100% with Councillor Watson on this. And if he wants to put a motion on the table, I'm happy with that.
Mr. Graves, please.
I think what would be helpful, based on that comment, is to ask the treasurer, what is the numeric value that we're at relative to the 2 point something that we're sitting at? I don't think it's a $500,000, but what is the numeric value that we're sitting at? 420,000 or something like that.
Thank you, Ms. Gupta-Reed.
Yeah, it's $420,388.
Thank you, Ms. Gupta-Reed.
Have you got the number? Do we need repeated?
$420,000. $420,388.24.
Deputy Mayor Noble.
Councillor Watson, were you putting a motion on the floor for that?
I will when through you, Mayor. I will when I get all the numbers clarified by finance, clerk, deputy clerk. Thanks.
Councillor Graham.
Sorry, weren't they just clarified there? Councillor Watson at $420,000, 388,000.
Mr. Graves, did you want to comment?
Just as a point of clarification, I believe based on the work that council has done earlier this evening and those reductions, in order to get to 0, if that's council's desire, then it would be a matter of $420,388, if I heard correctly, that would be removed from the Front Street project, the tax base, and then would have to be considered in the 2024 budget.
Questions or comments?
Mr. Mayor,
Councillor-
if I may, please.
Just quickly, in one moment, Councillor Connors has a question, please.
Through you, Mayor Sloan, Mr. Graves, that 420,000 we would remove from the 2.1 million tax levy. What would happen to the balance of that money? Would it go into the Front Street project?
Mr. Graves, please.
Yeah, the balance would stay in the project funding envelope for this year. Yes. It would just be reduced.
Thank you. Councillor Connors, follow up. Oh, sorry. Councillor Halpin, please.
Thank you. I rise to a point of order, Your Worship. This is a motion that is not valid as a motion without notice per section 10.8 of our procedural bylaw.
First and foremostly, that's one of the bylaws I don't know offhand. I apologize. Mr. Graves, could you comment on the procedure of this, please?
Well, my experience with budgets is that, when we're having a discussion about budgets and you're trying to get to a budget, that you go through a series of motions, and there may be new motions that arise during the evening that council can, if council by majority consensus agrees to deal with, then you can deal with it. So.
Thank you. And I think when we have a forum or we have a democratic process where people vote, I think it's relatively straightforward. We're televised. We have people watching.
Thank you. Are you overruling then?
Excuse
To
me,
be clear, are you overruling my point of order?
I'm overruling your point of order.
Okay, then I ask you concisely to explain your reasons for feeling that that is appropriate so that we can vote on it.
Because I think that when the council here, Councillor Halpin, we're going to vote on it in a moment. And we'll all have the opportunity. You'll have the opportunity to vote on the motion that was put forward. And at that point, I think there's the opportunity for discussion. Councillor Graham?
And through you, Mr. Mayor, I think that by having our CAO, our interim CAO, say that different motions can come forward as long as it is the will of council, we can move forward with that. That seems to be the situation here.
We vote without discussion once the mayor has explained this, and we all have access to the rules of procedure.
Thank
And
you, Councillor Halpin.
Sorry, before I was interrupted, as I was saying, because we have our CAO here who is
We vote
determining.
without discussion once the mayor has made his statement, and we all have access to the rules of procedure.
So just if I may interrupt for a moment, Councillor Graham. So we have a motion on the table, correct? And you rose on a point of order.
Yes, I did, and I have appealed your ruling. So
Right.
you have explained why you think that that's acceptable.
Just, and I explain it only, Councillor Halpin, because it's going to be commented on. It's
Right.
going to be put forward. I believe if there's a seconder, like on all the motions, we would have a vote on it. So we have quorum.
And
I
your
believe it
worship,
falls
if
under-
that is your reason, that's fine. You can have whatever reason you
Okay.
choose to provide, but we then vote without discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Halpin, for your information, and I appreciate it. I'm learning as we go along. Councillor Watson?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I need to have discussion because I don't know what's going on here. I don't know what you're talking about. Thanks.
Thank you.
So
So I have said that there's not just cause to add this motion because it does not fit our rules of procedure. The mayor has said that he would like to overrule that. I have asked him to explain his reasons, and so now we as a council vote about whether we uphold his ruling or not.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Halpin, and thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Connors, please.
Through you, Mayor Sloan, to Mr. Perrin. We talking about maintaining our levels at just over $3 million.
We
If-
have to vote on this first. Councillor Connors. We have rules of
Excuse me,
procedure.
I'm not used to being interrupted, and I would ask you to stand down while I ask my question.
I would ask
Thank
that
you.
we follow the
If I
rules.
could have-
Thank you.
Thank you. And just one more time, folks, let me say that when we ask people to come here, we bring them up to the podium and we say, please act respectfully. And I think as a council, we can try to attain the same goals. So I respect everyone's interest in this very important matter. Councillor Halpin, Councillor Connors, Councillor Collars, continue, please.
So again, through you, Mayor Sloan, to Mr. Perrin. If we reduce this tax levy of 2.1 million by 420,000 to get to a zero budget, then that comes out of our capital budget you had talked about around the 3.1 or 3.2 million number. And then we would have to make this up next year. Should the number for Front Street come in $500,000 lighter than it did this year, would there still be that makeup if we got a better deal? I mean, how does that exactly work next year, Lloyd?
Thank you, Mr. Perrin.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Connor. So when we talk about $3 million, we talk about a funding envelope. Okay, so it's not on a project by project basis. We talk about a funding envelope for the asset class roads. So if for example, we go to tender and what was a project that was estimated at $5 million comes in at 4.5, well, we benefit from that as a municipality, and the residents benefit from that because now that money that was intended can be utilized going forward and maybe increase the level of expenditure and have that savings augment the 3.1 or inclusive or increase beyond 3.1 or $3 million. So the reality is even at $3 million, we're going behind. You know, we're not maintaining our assets to the level that they should be. And the other thing to keep in mind is that development is great, but when we have new subdivisions that get created, that in effect is adding burden on the municipality going forward on your capital program, because you have to maintain those assets, you have to replace those assets, and the first capital dollars that you will spend on those assets are within 10-year time period. You're going to have to go in and crack seal new streets. That's just the facts. You know, you get cracking, and then within the 20-year time, you're going to put a top lift of asphalt on those streets. So, you know, we have an asset pool that is continually growing with new development, and you know, we're going to start seeing the pressures of that within the next 5 to 7 years. So even at $3 million, you're not maintaining or you're not funding your program in order to ensure that your condition is going to be maintained.
Thank you, Mr. Perrin, Mr. Graves, and then
Thank you. I just, I hate to jump into points of order, but I'm going to do it. So Councilor Halpin did have a motion on the floor. So before we consider any other motions, it was to determine whether your explanation was okay for council. And so you just need to take the vote on that with council to make sure that they're comfortable with your explanation and moving forward.
Thank you. And I would remind you, Mayor Sloan, that it is your duty as the mayor under your oath to enforce the provisions of the procedural bylaw and to put to vote all motions as they arise for
Thank
the
you.
procedural bylaw.
So we have a motion right now or from Councillor Halpin. Does Ms. Leach read it out? Is that how it works? Or
Seconder, because it is
Okay,
not a
it's
motion
okay.
in that sense.
all right, well, we're learning as we go along here, Councillor Halpin. I don't know the. So first of all, I think we're looking for the will of council on this. Is that fair?
Yes, your worship, you have overruled and you have explained, and then the council, without a motion, because it isn't truly a motion, it's a point of order, the council then votes whether to uphold your ruling or not.
If I could have a vote on whether the decision is upheld, please. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Mr. Graves.
So where I understand it, if I can help council focus a bit, the question really on the table is, or I guess the motion to be on the table is, does council want to reduce the tax levy for the Front Street project by an additional $420,388? That's up to council if somebody wants to put that on the floor. I think that's where we're at. As I understand the discussion, that would get the budget to zero. And that's where I've seen the discussion go tonight. So
Thank you. Councillor Watson, then Councillor Graham, please.
Yes, I would like to bring, through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to bring that motion forward. I'd just like to remind people that that big road project, that Elm and Centennial, it came under budget by $300,000. So hey, let's hope for the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Watson. Second, we have a seconder for the motion. Okay, I think Mr. Wen,
to you, Deputy Clerk, I believe the motion is that the tax levy portion of the Front Street project be reduced by $420,388. Perhaps if we can, Mr. Mayor, just in terms of math or anything technically that the treasurer might have a comment on that. I think we know the impact of it, but I just want to make sure technically from a finance perspective, if there's any outstanding. We're
I
not
would
missing.
suggest let's do it 450,000 as a rounded figure, please.
thank you, Ms. Gupta-Harit. Sure, no problem. Ms. Leach, please.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Councillor Watson, seconded by Councillor Graham, that staff be directed to reduce the tax levy portion of the Front Street project by $450,000.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I wanted to say up to, because I don't want a negative budget. I wanted to say up to 450. That would give me the leeway if there was few cents up and down or few dollars up and down.
Thank you, Ms.
So that we
Gupta-Harit.
can get a 0%. Sorry.
Okay, up to.
Thank
Well,
you. Yeah.
we're okay with that, folks? Okay. Very good. Thank you for your patience.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Councillor Watson, seconded by Councillor Graham, that staff be directed to reduce the tax levy portion of the Front Street project by up to $450,000.
Council, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
I ask that we record the vote, please.
Absolutely, Councillor Halpin. If we could record the vote, please.
Councillor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Halpin,
No.
Councillor Watson,
A big yes.
Councillor Connors,
Yes.
Councillor Bogman,
No.
Deputy Mayor Noble,
Yes.
Mayor Sloan.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Moving on to bylaws. We need a confirmation bylaw. If I could, oh, pardon me, Mr. Graves.
Sorry, we just want to, we've got a couple of other wrap up motions that are at the end of that sheet. And maybe I can have the deputy clerk read it. And of course, we're looking at a 0% increase. That's what the number is there. And there's no, that's just it. You don't have to put a number beside it. So.
Thank you.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads that administration be directed to prepare 2023 tax rates based upon an overall levy increase of 0%, and that staff be directed to prepare the necessary bylaws respecting the 2023 budget. And further, that staff be directed to give notice of council's intention to pass the 2023 budget bylaws at council's regular meeting dated May 8th, 2023.
If I could get a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Graham, Councillor Connors. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
I ask that we record that as well, please.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Halpin.
Councillor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Halpin,
No.
Councillor Watson,
Yes.
Councillor Connors,
Yes.
Councillor Bogman,
No.
Deputy Mayor Noble,
Yes.
Mayor Sloan.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
if I may, please.
Please.
There's a technical word thing that I would want Ms. Delaney to correct in the motion. She said levy. It's not levy, it's a rate increase. It's a technical word because levy is from the growth and we are talking about the rate.
okay. I think we can amend that. Everyone's comfortable with that change? Thank you very much.
It's just a technical word. We want to
Yes.
ensure that we have correct thing. Thank
I
you.
appreciate that. Thank you, Ms. Gupta. I think we're okay. I think we can switch now to the bylaws, please. First confirmation bylaw, if I could get a mover and a seconder. Councillor Graham, Councillor Watson.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Councillor Graham, seconded by Councillor Watson, that bylaw 2786 be read a first and second time.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. If I could get a mover and a seconder for the third and final passing, Councillor Watson, Deputy Mayor Noble.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Councillor Watson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Noble, that bylaw 2786 be read a third time and finally passed.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And if I could get a motion for adjournment, please, Councillor Bachman, Councillor Halpin.
Mayor Sloan, the motion reads, moved by Councillor Bogman, seconded by Councillor Halpin, that the special meeting of council dated Thursday, April 13th, 2023 be adjourned at 8:54 p.m. and the next meeting of council be scheduled for Monday, April 24th, 2023 at 6:00 p.m.
Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you, staff. Thank you, council, for coming out on a otherwise nice night. I appreciate your time and efforts.
I do want to say thank you, council. Thank you so much.